All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started now. My name is Jason DiLorenzo, and again, I'm the founder and executive director of an organization called Doctors Without Quarters. For the past 7 years, we've worked with Ross Medical graduates to ensure that you guys are navigating what is ultimately a complex and evolving student loan marketplace. Once you graduate and you go into training, ideally, and on through your transition to practice, and understanding the student loan marketplace and all the options that are available to you today, and how to maximize any savings opportunities such as loan forgiveness or interest subsidies while you're in training and have high levels of debt but modest incomes for as long as you'll be in training. Navigating that marketplace is a complex, moving target. And so we want to give you the right advice and even consultation in partnership with your financial aid office to make sure that you're jumping out of the gate with the right action plan in place and you understand how to update it. So what we're going to talk about this evening in terms of our agenda is the graduate profile of a Ross Medical student. What economically does the average Ross Medical student look like upon graduation, and what will the next few years look like in terms of debt, income, and other financial considerations? We're going to do a brief overview of the repayment marketplace, and while we identify several options that exist both federally and privately for doctors today, there's really a few that just make the most sense for doctors as you enter training and finish up school once your grace period is exhausted on your federal student loans, your Stafford loans, and your Grad Plus loans, namely. We'll do a brief loan forgiveness and legislation update. One of the things that doctors should be pursuing today, if they're working in teaching hospitals and ultimately in practice for nonprofit or public service organizations, is the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Also, there are newer federal repayment plans that are based on your income that offer loan forgiveness no matter what sector or what job you work in after you graduate. You simply need to be in repayment in an income-driven plan for either 20 or 25 years before loan forgiveness would be available federally. So we want to understand when that might be appropriate for you, and we'll show some case studies that demonstrate this. And then ultimately, I want to carry this through sort of a training exit interview. So much like you're getting advice about how to navigate the student loan repayment marketplace, as having been in school and in deferment on your loans for 4 years, once you transition from training and ultimately what probably is a modest income versus what will hopefully be a much higher income when you transition to practice, whether it's 3 or 8 or more years from now, that's another student loan decision time for you. We call that sort of a fork in the road with respect to loan repayment, where, if you're going to take a practicing job with a high income that's in the for-profit sector or independent private practice, it's at that point that you might want to start getting aggressive on your debt to eliminate it as fast as possible in conjunction with your other financial plans and goals. So we'll talk about that fork in the road, a training exit interview, if you will. Ultimately, to talk about student loans, we also have to talk about budgeting, tax filing, and other financial considerations, because defining your student loan strategy can only be done in the context of your existing and projected financial profile, your economic profile. I'll take some time to answer questions at the end. So you can use that questions field along the way, and I'll probably be addressing questions at the end, just in case some of my content will cover questions that you might be asking early. And then finally, we're actually in partnership with your financial aid office to offer complimentary, comprehensive consultations at no cost to you, the graduate, but rather the school is absorbing that cost, which is something that most schools don't do. So we want to make that service available to you, where we can apply all of the analytics that I'm going to show you in my case studies here after we talk about the student loan marketplace, so that you can apply them to your situation directly. There's a lot of things or questions that we can answer in an educational presentation like this, and certainly one-on-one when we're analyzing your specific situation that you might not even be thinking to ask in this marketplace. So we'll try to bring some of those considerations up as we speak this evening so that you're prepared for your consultation. It is no question or a secret that debt levels for medical graduates and really in all educational realms have increased dramatically over the past. Here I'm showing roughly 25 years. I saw a story today that came out that said that the overall student debt burden nationally is now almost $1.5 trillion, and which is roughly doubled since we were coming out of the subprime mortgage crisis and economic recession that happened in the late 2000s, 2008, 2009. So suffice it to say, even though the national average for medical graduates is a little over $200,000 now, osteopathic medical programs are a little more expensive. Those in Caribbean medical school programs like yourselves tend to have a little bit higher debt levels. And it's important to understand that, if you're sitting on $200,000 of debt or $500,000 of debt or more, that, your overall debt level coupled with what you expect your income to be, not just in training for however many years you're going to train, but also based on your specialty that you've chosen or will choose, what your income's going to look like for years, even after you transition to practice. So understanding your income growth, both personally and in your household, if you're married or planning on getting married to a working spouse, understanding that as best possible now can help inform your student loan repayment strategy now and help you refine it in the future. So how much debt you have, how much income you'll be earning over the next several years early in your career. We also want to couple that with your sector of employment as well. And how long you train would probably also be a consideration in evaluating what's the right student loan repayment strategy for you. So we want to highlight all those things for a Ross graduate today. Your loan portfolio, you probably, hopefully, are aware that your federal student loans typically will come from Stafford loans up to the borrowing limit, and then after that, Grad Plus loans. Those are respectively 6.6 and 7.6% for this academic year. Last year, they were a little bit lower, and the year before that, they were a little bit lower than that. This is due to what's been an economic rising interest rate environment that we've seen over the past really now couple of years. We've started to see the trend turn up. But the good news with these, even though I personally don't feel like the government is doing you a great service by offering rates to graduate students that are higher than what they offer to undergrad students, these rates are fixed. So if we do see rising interest rates in the future, the loans that you've already taken out, the interest rate won't change on them. And in fact, if you're getting forgiveness or subsidy benefit, which we'll talk about, you can reduce the effective rate of these loans by navigating the student loan marketplace appropriately. And so we do also see graduates that have private loans, institutional sorts of loans, or even loans from credit unions or banks. We tend to see these as less competitive, particularly if they have variable rates, which could go up over time and have started to, as I've mentioned recently. But sometimes a private loan might be necessary for residency relocation type of loan, or other expenses that aren't related to education. We want to understand that if you do have private loans, once you sign a match letter and you'll be transitioning to training in July or roughly around this coming summer, that you can often maybe take poorer rate loans if you have private loans that are 9, 10 or more percent, or even variable, that once you've signed on to become a resident, you have a better underwriting profile in the private marketplace, and you may be able to improve upon less competitive private loans that might exist now. So always want to be looking out for new opportunities to advance through your career. Your underwriting profile improves, and if you can make poorly priced debt more competitive, you should always be looking to do that. Suffice it to say, private loans are not eligible for the federal repayment programs that we'll talk about here shortly. So I'm highlighting here, all of the repayment options that would exist for you when you were tasked with going into repayment, which on your federal student loans happens 6 months after you graduate from medical school. So as I understand it, this audience this evening is all of you have graduated sometime between roughly September to the end of November, or are about to graduate here in the coming weeks. So after you formally graduate from medical school, you get a 6 month grace period on your Stafford loans and your Grad Plus loans. So roughly June, if you've graduated at the end of November, will be when you're going to be tasked with going in repayment as a last option. You can take action in advance, and that's something that we've been facilitating for a lot of Ross graduates over the past couple of years. But if you were to do nothing with your student loans and you graduated in November, then right about towards the end of your grace period, roughly 60 days before the end of your grace period in June, you'll receive correspondence from your servicer that says your grace period is about to expire. Choose a repayment plan. And what we've seen doctors choose over the years is what's shown on this list here. But I've kind of highlighted those in green that tend to be the most appropriate for those going into training, or if you're waiting to match and you're not working, or you have a modest income, or you're back in school, then you'll want to make sure that you're maximizing savings opportunities that are available as you still work on your career. Suffice it to say, if you have $350,000 of overall federal student loan debt at today's interest rates, to pay that back over 10 years, the monthly payment on that level of debt is right around $3,900 or $4,000 per month. So for obvious reasons, medical graduates going into training or or looking to match, you're not choosing that level of payment. It's untenable, if not incredibly undesirable. And so you look for payment relief during training. And after you graduate, when you have to go into repayment. Now, a lot of graduates in the past have chosen forbearance or deferment, where you don't have to pay anything on your federal student loans. However, it's important to note that for medical graduates today, with higher levels of debt than in the past, and interest rates that are higher than we've seen in recent years, then not paying anything on your loans is very costly during training. And so we look to the income-driven plans to have a little skin in the game with respect to loan repayment and drive both loan forgiveness as well as interest subsidies in some cases by using an income-driven plan versus not paying anything on your loans during training. How the income-driven plans work are they basically will base your monthly payments on somewhere between 10 and 15% of your discretionary income. And how that's basically accounted for is either via a tax return that you filed for the previous tax year, or from a payroll stub once you've begun working. Now, for this reason, we generally recommend all medical school graduates, even if you haven't worked, and most probably haven't while you're finishing up medical school, if you don't have an income, you can still file a tax return for the year prior. And in fact, if it shows zero income, it's very possible to achieve a zero payment for your first year of training, but be in line to start counting down the clocks for loan forgiveness, as well as interest subsidies if they're available to you, either through this revised pay-as-you-earn plan, which only charges half of outstanding interest that's accruing, while your monthly payments don't require all of what's accruing in interest against you. So typically, one of these income-driven repayment plans listed here are going to make the most sense for a medical graduate who's reaching the end of their grace period, moving into training, into their PGY 1 year. Just to give you an idea of what these numbers look like for the average resident. Here we're showing a 4-year training term. You've got, in this case, about $375,000 in debt at 6.5%. In that case, the payment monthly on a 10-year plan is like $4,200 a month. Now, if they were to choose forbearance, which again I call the F word with respect to loan repayment, in that case you'd have $2,000 a month of interest accruing against you. That's $24,000 a year. We want to stop that bleeding of accrued interest as best possible while you're earning a modest income and not able to aggressively pay down your debt. So if you use one of the income-driven plans, here I'm showing the pay-as-you-earn program and the revised pay-as-you-earn program, both which require 10% of your discretionary income. The payments, if you have a tax return that shows a $0 income or anything close to that, anything really less than $20,000 a year in a year is going to drive close to a zero payment for you. We see that payments are as low as zero in the intern year. And then even in the fourth year of training, they've not even broached or exceeded $300 per month. And what you're getting here by using the income-driven plans is if you use that interest benefit plan in revised pay-as-you-earn, you can actually have up to $40,000 of interest not accrue against you. So we would much prefer that to forbearance if that's available to you based on the nuances of each of the income-driven plans, which we'll talk about in your consultations. You also get, still access to your income close to what it would have been if you chose a forbearance or a deferment. And your payments in an income-driven plan do also qualify you for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program if, in fact, you work for a qualifying entity for a cumulative 10 years. So let's talk about that for a second, and then we'll also talk about the 20 and 25-year loan forgivenesses. I want to talk about just a couple other tax filing considerations. If you haven't thought about this as a question, it often comes up at this point, but in an income-based plan, if I'm married or I plan to be married and my spouse works, how's that going to impact my income-based payments? And so this is something we can help figure out for you in more detail based on your own situation. But suffice it to say, if you're married to someone that earns income and you file your taxes married and jointly, then that income will ultimately dictate your payments in an income-driven repayment plan. Now, you can file your taxes married and separately and isolate your own income for the purposes of having a lower payment on your student loans. A lot of graduates do that during training if they're trying to maximize specifically public service loan forgiveness. Now, the revised pay-as-you-earn program that offers that interest benefit does not allow you to file your taxes married and separately. In other words, if you go into this repayment plan, the application requires that you disclose both your own income and your spouse's income, regardless of how you filed your taxes. So that becomes a consideration that you'll want to take into account when you're choosing a repayment plan or possibly switching repayment plans in the future. These monthly payments from the income-driven plans are based on your adjusted gross income. So if you're making things like retirement plan contributions, which should be available to you starting in training, or your moving expenses, they can help reduce your adjusted gross income, which can positively impact your student loan payment in terms of reducing it and driving more savings. So public service loan forgiveness, again, you've probably seen this program in the media if you're at all familiar with it. If I'm to simplify it, and I know it's difficult to simplify a program that is in fact relatively complex, but we work to simplify it for graduates who are going to be eligible for it or might be eligible for it during training, because 90+% of teaching hospitals in the United States are public service, or they're 501c3 nonprofit organizations. Therefore, if you're employed by one directly, you're qualified for public service loan forgiveness. So if we know that you need to be in an income-driven repayment plan and working full-time for a qualifying entity, and we know that an income-driven repayment plan is already the best thing for you while you're in training, assuming you can't go into a $3,000 or $4,000 a month repayment plan during training, then you're already doing something that's economically beneficial and you're qualifying for public service loan forgiveness. For those of you with higher debt levels, like Caribbean Medical School graduates, your amount of debt may incent you, if you've trained with a nonprofit entity, to take a nonprofit job after you're done with training. And that's one of the case studies I'm going to show you here shortly. But if I'm simplifying public service loan forgiveness, you need to have the right kind of loan and make the right kind of payment while you're working full-time for the right kind of organization. And again, that's any federal, state, or local government or agency, or any 501c3 nonprofit organization. And that means that over 90% of hospitals in the U.S., teaching hospitals, qualify for loan forgiveness as their 501c3 nonprofits, and they employ their house staff directly. Real quick, the eligible loans are going to be any direct Stafford, Grad Plus, or direct consolidation loan. If you have other federal types of loans, or Perkins loans, or health professions student loans, or loans for disadvantaged students, they're not standalone eligible for public service loan forgiveness, but you can turn them into a direct consolidation loan and make them eligible. So a lot of times we talk about doing consolidation right after someone graduates, so that you can enter repayment as opposed to having to wait till the end of your grace period, and you can start driving savings sooner in those cases. Eligible payments, like I said, to drive savings here, you're going to need to be using one of the income-driven plans that we've been talking about. And the payments to qualify need to be cumulative, not consecutive. There's a question of whether or not, we often get this question is, will I work for a nonprofit entity after I'm done with training? And you may not know the answer. Most likely you don't know the answer to that question at this point, excuse me, in your career. It's important to understand as you're highlighting and evaluating your future early in your career, that at certain specialties, or if you work in certain states, you may have a higher opportunity to work for nonprofit entities than in other specialties or in other states. So we want to try to understand that environment as best possible, and consult on it when we're helping you identify your repayment action plan. Here's a 10-year case study with someone for someone that has $300,000 in debt, does work in a residency program that is loan forgiveness eligible, expects to earn a starting salary once they transition to practice of $250,000. Maybe they don't know this yet, but next year they're getting married to someone who earns $125,000 a year, has no student loan debt. So what I'm highlighting here is, in this case, the use of the revised pay-as-you-earn plan for 10 total years, under the assumption that after the 4 years of training, she transitions to a public service loan forgiveness eligible role. At the end of these 10 years, then, she would have paid, based on the income-driven plan she used, almost $125,000 out of pocket. And what gets forgiven here, tax-free, is $318,000. Now, if you have $500,000 of federal student loan debt, or $400,000, what's interesting about the income-driven plans and then the tax-free loan forgiveness is that if your debt is that much higher than $300,000, excuse me, your out-of-pocket cost doesn't change, and loan forgiveness, since it's tax-free, would be a much higher number here. But the result to you is the same. In other words, the higher levels of debt you have, the more incented you are to pursue these 6 years after training, for a total of 10, that they be with a nonprofit or public service qualified organization. So we want to help you identify this savings opportunity. And with the interest benefit here, during training, even if she was not to pursue public service loan forgiveness after training, she will have enjoyed an effective interest rate during training of under 3.5% because of the interest benefit. There are other loan repayment programs available for doctors today: National Health Service Corps, Indian Health Service, Department of Defense. You may have looked into some of these programs. You can utilize the income-driven plans during your training and beyond to get loan forgiveness that's federal, and also still participate in these programs. So if you're going to get some loan repayment through a state-based program where you're working in an underserved area, or it's a federal program like National Health Service Corps, you can pay down existing debt with that in those years of service and still qualify for the federal plans, as long as you keep your loans federal and you continue to use an income-driven repayment plan. You can switch programs. So in other words, if you identify that The revised pay-as-you-earn program, or we help you identify that and put some numbers to it to say, coming out of the gate, you want to use one income-driven repayment plan, but then it makes sense to switch into a different repayment plan, either due to higher household income because you got married, or certain income-driven plans don't have payment caps, others do. So when your income goes up, you may want to switch into a capped program. You can switch programs during and beyond training, and you won't be sacrificing, for example, if you did 3 years in one income-driven plan and then switched into a different one, you could still get public service loan forgiveness after 7 more years. You don't reset the clock on that loan forgiveness. It continues to count. However, never consolidate your loans once you've started working towards this, because a consolidation would reset the clock. So these folks that are sending you emails and snail mail that talk about student loan consolidation are typically fraudulent and opportunistic. Make sure that once you set this path, that you don't do anything to compromise it. You may have heard that public service loan forgiveness is legislatively on the chopping block. And even some stories in the media that suggest that the government isn't honoring it. Don't believe this stuff. Don't believe the hype. You have public service loan forgiveness in those master promissory notes that I'm sure you've all read cover to cover. Therefore, it would take an act of Congress to overturn this, and proposed programs do seek to either limit, cap, or otherwise eliminate public service loan forgiveness. But it's written in the legislation that it would only apply to future borrowers. So the folks that are applying for public service loan forgiveness today, because it only came out right about 11 years ago, are typically not eligible. They've done something wrong along the way, maybe got poor advice from their servicers. But student loans weren't nationalized by the government until 2010. And the income-driven plans didn't start to hit any sort of critical mass in terms of even availability until after 2010. Therefore, people applying today wouldn't be eligible for it. It's probably not going to start seeing that hit the budget and loan forgiveness be granted till closer to 2020, and then in increasing numbers in future years. But there's a historical precedent for grandfathering here. It's in your promissory notes. The class action attorneys are already lined up, foaming at the mouth at any hint of the government going back on this. And so we do believe that it's going to be available to those who have it in their promissory notes. Therefore, you guys uniquely should be seeking to take advantage of it wherever possible. Certainly in training, you can position for it almost by accident. In an evolving marketplace, you gotta update your strategy annually. Some of the things I'm talking to you about now are new, and so over the past 7 years, this message has changed and evolved as the student loan marketplace has evolved. Newer income-driven plans have come out over the years. There were only a couple back in 2010, and now there are 5 or 6 of them. So understand that the marketplace is evolving, and you need to update your strategy annually. We talked about the fork in the road and that transition to practice, where if you take a nonprofit job after you're done with training, or even if you take a nonprofit job after you're done with training and your residency, if 90% of teaching hospitals are for-profits, that means 10% are not. If 90% are nonprofits, that means 10%. Up to 10% are for-profits. And so if you do your training in a for-profit residency, still going to probably want to use the income-driven plans to stop that bleeding of accrued interest. In the income-driven plans, you're also counting down the clock every year that you use one of those programs for either 20 or 25-year taxable loan forgiveness. So you get the payment relief during training. And then ultimately, if you take a public service qualified job, say after 3 years of a family medicine residency, and you take a job with a nonprofit organization, you can start the public service loan forgiveness clock ticking then. You would never have wanted to refinance your loans with a private lender. There's a bunch of companies out there now like SoFi and Laurel Road, DRB, Common Bond, Earnest, Credible, an increasing number of private players purporting to offer lower rates to those who have high rate federal student loan debt. And yes, there are lower rates available out there for the right profile. But when you refinance your loans with a private lender, you're giving up all the federal benefits that we're talking about here, such as the income-driven plans, the opportunity for either taxable or public service loan forgiveness. And that typically is not going to make sense for a doctor in training that has any meaningful amount of federal student loan debt. Call that over $100,000 of debt. So we don't typically talk about refinancing being appropriate until you get closer to that fork in the road where you are capable of aggressively paying down your student loans through a higher income and for-profit employment. And you know you're not going to have to rely on the federal plans that are available to you anymore. Only then would you seek to refinance your loans. In terms of a salary boost when you're choosing a job in the future, here I'm showing after 4 years of training a graduating resident thinking about the next step in her career. How does loan forgiveness impact the economics of working for a nonprofit? So if she had $375,000 in debt at the end of medical school, depending on the income-driven plan she used, she'd have somewhere between $425,000 and $470,000 of debt after she was done with her 4 years of training. Now, if she was offered a nonprofit job at $155,000 in salary, and we can play with these numbers in your individual consultations, but then she was also offered a for-profit job, which had a $205,000 starting salary. There's a decision, obviously, to be made there that isn't just economic, but also personal and professional. We want to figure out the economic part, because if you take that nonprofit job, you're eligible for public service loan forgiveness. And how we calculated this sample here is, your reduction in student loan payments for the next 6 years, if you take the nonprofit job, is about $350,000 of after-tax savings, meaning you pay on your student loans with after-tax earnings. And so that $350,000 roughly of savings on your student loans, if you calculate that as a salary boost, an average additional salary equivalent for that next 6 years that you took the nonprofit job, your salary is actually closer to about $245,000 in value for that 6 years. So we understand that, and even nonprofit employers are now starting to get their arms wrapped around this unique subsidy that they get by employing you and helping even you navigate it. So if you are uncertain where you're going to be practicing after you're done with training, I imagine that's the case for most, you want to be able to be set up so that you can maximize the benefits of the federal plans that are available to you. Or if you take the for-profit job, basically as soon as you do that, you're going to want to seek to refinance to lower rates if that's available. I mentioned budgeting here. Suffice it to say, if you're not budgeting now, when you transition to training and you start to earn an income through residency, I think it's really important to set up a budget for yourself, whether it's a simple Excel spreadsheet or one of the multitude of alternatives that are available online out there, like Mint.com and I think Yodlee and probably an increasing number of budgeting softwares that we'll see that are free to use. Whether it's a simple sheet or you're integrating things into an online plan, understand that budgeting is a discipline and a habit that will serve you well long term. So it might feel like having $300,000+ of debt and a $50,000 income in training is untenable. In other words, how am I going to save? I don't believe that to be the case. I think if you start to develop a budget for yourself now, that will serve you well, that habit, long term. And so here's a repayment timeline after graduation. Now, whether you graduated in September, November, you're not graduating until Q1 of next year or later, we suggest filing a tax return for the year 2018 so that you have the option, hopefully, to get a payment as low as zero. Roughly in July, if you've matched to a training program, and best of luck to all of you, you'll begin residency late June, early July. The latest any of your grace periods would end would be by fall of 2019. You could potentially, as I mentioned earlier, consolidate all of your loans. We'll show you how to do that in your one-on-one comprehensive discussions. And then also the income-driven repayment plans, you'll want to renew those every year. So we'll give you the map to be able to do that from after being educated on what the longer term should look like and things that might implore you to update or switch programs along the way. And then as you transition to practice, we talk about the fork in the road typically being there. So what's available to all of you, and then I'll answer some questions here, as I mentioned earlier, is individual one-on-one loan consultations, where we'll apply all of these analytics I'm showing you to your case specifically and answer all the questions that might be popping up in your mind. Now I'll read a few of them off here shortly. Again, this is free for Ross Med for you guys. You have to be a 2018 or 2019 graduate, and the coupon codes you're going to use, you'll get an email from us also highlighting the web link here and the code. And it's also come from your financial aid office. But the code you want to use is RossMed100 as it's listed here. What ultimately we do here again is a review of all your repayment options, highlighting the one that makes the most sense after a discussion with you about your specialty and your future plans economically and professionally. We often will do the consolidation review and even actually enroll you in a repayment plan and consolidate your loans if it's appropriate, all in this meeting. It takes about an hour. And so this is, again, most schools don't offer this level of detail or support. So we encourage you to take advantage of it and share any good experiences with your financial aid office or any experience. We definitely are excited to work with you guys and deliver some real value here as you seek to navigate this, again, complex and evolving marketplace. I'm going to jump to the questions here. And then again, we'll email you as a follow-up here just this evening or tomorrow with more information about how to sign up. Let's see. Questions. Actually, don't see any questions here. I'll stay on for just a couple more minutes. Feel free to type those in. Otherwise, thanks for listening. And if you have any questions, you can email us directly. My email address is actually jason@dwoq.com, but we can certainly take your emails at help as well. And all the best as you finish up medical school and on into your transition to practice, and happy holidays as well. There was a question. I didn't file my taxes for 2018. Yeah, so the 2018 tax filing isn't due till mid-April 2019. You can still do that. We'll discuss that, the best way to approach that. Yeah, technically, if you're still not working, like if you finish up school in December and you're still you don't transition to residency till the summer. If you're not working, then you wouldn't need a tax return to be able to get a zero payment. So if you can honestly answer the question, I don't have a job, you might still be able to get a zero payment, but we can confirm that with the tax return. So yeah, technically you have till mid-April to file that 2018 tax return. You are very welcome. Yeah, I know this can be an overwhelming amount of information, which is why it's exciting to be able to do the individual one-on-one consults. We will absolutely be answering all questions, and probably some you didn't even think to ask one-on-one, so that you can continue to focus on your studies and matching and all that fun stuff. Yeah, so there was a question about signing up for the consultation. The latest, our calendars only probably go out to March, around match week or even before. So there is a there is a lag on our scheduling program. So as I think you can only schedule up to 3 or 4 months out. I think it's probably 3 months out. So you can email me or us directly if you want to land on a future date. It's going to be available because we don't even have scheduling capability past March. I do want to highlight to you guys, don't schedule for the actual meeting until at least 3 weeks after you've graduated. So if you're part of the December, class, set it up maybe in early as early January. We want to give the school time to report to the Department of Education that you are no longer in school and your grace period's commenced. That's when we can do the most for you in these meetings. Somebody said difference between grace and forbearance period. Grace period is automatic on Stafford and Grad Plus loans. So in other words, once you graduate, you have 6 months to pay nothing. That's why it's called that sort of a grace period. Forbearance would be an option to continue to pay zero after your grace period. So the result to you is, a zero payment, but the terms are different because the forbearance period is elected as a repayment, quote unquote, option, but it's the most costly because of the fact that all of your interest accrues against you with no benefit or forgiveness. All right, great, guys. Here's one more. I graduated in September. What do you recommend since my grace period ends in February? To do your consultation as soon as possible. There's a possibility that we would want to consolidate your loans and enroll you in repayment as soon as possible, especially if we can get a zero payment for you. So you're good to go right now in terms of a consultation, and it may make sense to get you in a repayment plan even before February. What if you're enrolled in an MPH program? A great question. If you are enrolled in another program while you are in training, but you're working full time for a qualifying entity, what happens when you're enrolled in a program is often they put you in school loan deferment. You can ask your loan servicer to waive that, and in fact, you should. I would rather see you in an income-driven repayment plan with a payment as low as potentially zero, and you're having the interest not capitalize against you. You're counting down the loan forgiveness clock, and if you're using repay, getting a subsidy. So it is not in your best interest to have the school put you in school deferment when you're working full-time for a qualifying entity, earning an income, and can be in an income-driven plan. So the form you'll ask for from your loan servicer is the in-school deferment waiver. Your request to waive in-school deferment. Great question. Yeah, forbearance is an annual term essentially. So you apply for forbearance. It would end at the end of a year. If people that used it in the past would just apply for it year over year, if they were in training and they had lower debt and 2% loans. That's not the case for most medical graduates today. You're much better off using the income-driven plan. So again, kind of call forbearance the F word for grads today if you've got meaningful debt. And yeah, there are consultations available now. If you register on our website, I'll show you guys how this looks. Can you guys see my, yeah, there we go. Well, so you go to this website, and again, this will be emailed to you, and then you sign up to register for your consultation here at the bottom. The coupon code you'll use is RossMed100. After you fill out, it takes about 5-10 minutes to fill out all our questions, upload your loans. You'll then be taken to the scheduler. And yeah, there should be consultations on our calendar available, this week. No problem. I'm going to type the website in here for you guys so that you can cut and paste it if you want to just go there right now. There you go. Hopefully you see it there in the question, my answers to the questions. There we go. All right, looks like we got some folks dropping off here now. So we'll be able to address any further questions that either come up later or at any time when we do your individual consultations. And if you have any questions in the interim, email us directly. Thank you. Have a great night, guys. And again, congratulations on finishing up medical school. Bye-bye.